So every now and again you see people posting P&Ls, and when you ask them what they're doing, they say that they're trading horse racing in play. And it looks impressive because they never seem to lose. It just seems to be a string of profits. Now there's a method that you can use that delivers this sort of a P&L. And as I've told you in other videos, just having a string of profits isn't necessarily a way to profit in the long term. You need to have an edge. So I'm going to show you the sort of method that they're using in this video. I'm going to show you how it works, why it has a high strike rate, but more importantly, I'm going to show you how you can beat them at their own game. So let me show you a simple trade here. I've only made £3 on this, but the important thing to remember in the context of trading is I've actually managed to earn that £3 by using a relatively small stake. So in terms of the profit that I've made for the stake that I've made, that's not too bad really. But also this is the last in a sequence of trades that I did for this video, and you can see that sequence in front of you here. Predominantly it's a load of profits and there is the odd loss in there, but you can see that I've ended up 36 odd pound up at the end of this little session that I did for you. So what exactly was I doing here and how did I produce these profits? So let's do a really simple trade. I go into this market, I lay something in this market, BetAngel offsets that trade in a profitable position for me. You can see it sat over here. Then I have to wait for that order to get matched. If we zoom the video on a little bit, you can see that that order does get matched and we make our £3 profit for our risk of about £30. But of course, there's a lot of detail that sits behind something as simple as this. So let's explore some of the detail of exactly why this trade worked, and also how often should it work and how can you get an edge. So in this video, what I did was a very simple lay to back trade. It was really uncomplicated and I've deliberately dumbed it down so it's in its simplest form. Carry on watching the video if you want to see something a little bit cleverer. But the reason for doing this at this particular point in the video was to introduce you into the concept of exactly why these types of trades work. If we go into a market and we see a horse priced at odds of 2, then it has a 50% chance of winning. But that means that it has a 50% chance of losing as well. So laying something at 2s, you will win 50% of the time, you will lose 50% of the time if you are laying. However, as you begin to crank up the odds from odds of 2, then things get a little bit more interesting, because if we lay a horse in running at odds of 4, that's basically saying at that point within the race it only has a 25% chance of winning, and therefore it has a 75% chance of losing. So laying something at 4s in play will give you a 75% success rate. So as I've mentioned, if you lay something in play at larger odds, then your strike rate is naturally going to be very high anyway, so that looks pretty impressive. But if you want to make it look even more impressive, then you would basically turn it into a trade. You would offset it by a percentage or a number of ticks, and then that strike rate will go up even higher. And that is because we're saying that we're not going to wait until the end of the race for that lay to come in. We're basically going to close that position out at some point within the race itself. So all that needs to happen is for the market to go out and touch those odds, and the horse could go on and win, and we would still win. So if you don't turn it into a traditional lay bet, but you turn it into a trade, in other words, by offsetting and putting a closing position somewhere else in the market, what you will actually find is the strike rate goes up and up and up. And the closer you put it in to your opening price, the higher that strike rate will be. So you can see that pursuing this sort of strategy gives you a naturally high strike rate. And I've said to you before in other videos that when you're actively trading a market, you need a base rate which to sort of set, because it's your ability to exceed that base rate that will make you profitable in the long term. If you match that base rate, you're just performing what the market will deliver to you already. So let me give you an example on pre-off horse racing. If I back something pre-off and then exit at post time, half the time that will end up in profit and half the time it will end up in a loss. So the base rate in that market is 50%. I need to exceed 50% on that type of trade in order to be able to make profit in the long term. And it's exactly the same that you have in play. It's got naturally high strike rates, which is why the P&Ls look so impressive. But fundamentally in the long term, you need to exceed those or do something clever in order to be able to make a profit. So let me show you how you can do something a little bit cleverer. So we're looking at a race at Newcastle here, and the current leader is Pillar of Hope. So that's the one that we're going to oppose.
But what we have to do is we have to wait for the right time to oppose it. You can see there's loads of other information on the screen here, which I'll explain to you in a second. But basically you can see that Pillar of Hope is leading, and you can see its price is shortening, but ultimately that's the one that we're most interested on. An explanation will follow in a minute. But yeah, we'll just wait for the right time in this race, and then we will click that lay button. So I actually get my timing slightly wrong on this. I'm a little bit too late when I click this button, but nonetheless, the time has come for us to actively do that. So I click the button. You can see the lay bet gets matched. BetAngel offsets that bet, and away we go. The trade is done very, very quickly. But of course, the question here is, why did I choose that runner? And also, why did I choose that specific moment in the race to do that particular trade?
So you'll notice the screen looks radically different from the other screen that we used, and that was because the first screen that we used was unmodified, and obviously on the second screen I've put lots more information on here, but I've also used total performance data to bring up information about what's going on course. And that's really handy because not only do you get a visualization of exactly what's going on the course, there's so many other things that you can do with it as well. But the thing I want to draw your attention to specifically on this screen and on total performance data is the race pars chart that we have on there. And the race pars chart will give you valuable information as to exactly how the race is likely to be run. So let's look at the race par chart, or pars, because there's more than one horse, and BetAngel will plot all of that for you. But basically, when we look at that particular chart, when you see the line going up, it means the horses are running a faster speed, and when it's at the bottom end of the range, that's the slower speed. And this varies from course, distance, and going. So those two lines are basically plotting what would be considered a very fast speed or what would be considered a very slow speed. And as soon as the race starts, then BetAngel starts plotting that data on each individual horse to show you exactly what the pace of that particular race is. And that's absolutely critical to understand if you're going to place a trade at exactly the right moment. But there's also another piece of information that's quite useful to understand, which is available completely free of charge, which will give you a clue as to exactly what horse you should be trading on that particular race. So the par chart will tell you exactly how the race is being run and how it's been historically run. But another piece of information that you really should be interested in as well is what sort of horses are in the race and how they're likely to run. So if you go on to the At the Races website or many other places, you can actually get a pace chart which will tell you if horses prefer to front run or whether they tend to be held up, because it's important to know that, to understand exactly how the race is being run against what we would typically expect. But yeah, that will give you critical information as to exactly what you should expect to see and to show you the effect that that has on the race and what that means for exactly which horse you should be trading and when. So what I've tried to show you here is a combination of a number of different things. But fundamentally speaking, we knew who the front runners were likely to be on this particular race. We saw a certain horse that we targeted actually end up front running, but we also saw, based upon the par chart and the speed data that we're getting from TPD, that they'd gone off very fast. So if they went off really fast, what was going to happen later on in the race? They were going to slow down. So basically we could understand how the race was likely to be run. We could see the data coming in real time. We could see they were going too fast, and therefore naturally the front runners would probably fade towards the end of that particular race. So that gave us the opportunity to do the trade. Now we could have just made this a straight lay if you wanted to do that. It all depends exactly what your specific objective is, but also, as you know, that there's a certain strike rate that would be delivered by that. And if you trade to some level within that, your strike rate will naturally go up. It all comes down to a bit of personal preference as to what you prefer to do and why and how and stuff like that. But fundamentally speaking, if we combine all of those components together, not only do we get a particularly high strike rate, but using all of the data and a little bit of knowledge of the racing itself, we also will allow us to find an edge. And that edge will come over people who aren't using that data, or perhaps people who just use historic data to look at a race, because sometimes you see historical data being used to sort of say, well, this horse has, traded at a lower price 50% of the time, but that's in the past. That isn't relevant to the race that is about to be run. So if you want to do this consistently and profitably over a period of time, you're going to have to get your finger out and do a bit of work. You're going to have to look at each individual race on its own merits. You're going to have to see how the race is unfolding and make a decision from there. But this trade is a naturally high strike rate trade. And if you want to get a bit of an edge and you want to be better than other people, and hopefully I've given you the information that will allow you to do that as well.